Hello and welcome to part 3 of my Dana 20 transfer case swap on my 1979 Jeep Cherokee. In my previous 2 videos I showed you how to disassemble and rebuild the Dana 20, and for this one I'm going to show you what I had to go through to get it bolted up. Now I would like to apologize beforehand. I was not able to film as much as I'd wanted to for this video, but I was able to get enough to accurately show you what needs to be done. It's not a lot, but if you don't know how to do it, it can seem overwhelming. This first part is something I missed in my previous video, and it's how to correctly measure and set the end plate for the front output yoke. In this picture, we can see the plate with the adjustment shims behind it. In order to tell if we've set the shims up correctly, we're going to use a dial indicator on the front output yoke. With the dial indicator securely mounted and the needle placed on the face of the yoke to measure the in and out play, we're going to zero out the gauge. I've included a link below on how to zero out and set up a dial indicator. In order to accurately test, we're going to start off by pushing the yoke all the way in, and then once the needle's set, we're going to zero out the gauge. At this point, we can pull the yoke away from the case to measure how much it deflects the needle. Now it's very important to make this measurement, because if I hadn't, I would have gone along with my previous calculations and the end play would have been way too much. In the instructions, the recommended end play is between 2 and 5 thousandths. When I measured it, I was reading 25 hundredths. Luckily, this is an easy fix. All I had to do was measure the shims and take out enough to equal 2 hundredths. And that reduced my 25 thousandths to about 3 to 4 thousandths. This next part is I'm going to go over just setting the transfer case in there. If you're doing this with a Cherokee like this, it's not going to line up with the stock Crossmember. It'll be set farther backwards. The first part of installing this transfer case is, of course, getting the rear output shaft switched over. The original one had a different spline count that wasn't compatible, so I had to take it to a transmission guy to have the rear output shaft swapped out. With the output shaft installed, we can bolt on the adapter and that large gear that came off the T18. Now I don't know if the CJ transmissions are bolted up differently, but I couldn't figure out why this adapter plate was cocked a little sideways. And since my motor mounts are relatively new, I'm just going to have to adjust the cross member so that it fits. It's not like this was unavoidable, since, like I said earlier, the new adapter pushes the mounting location a little back. First, let's cut the unneeded part of the cross member out of the way. Now that you've got your hole, you're going to take a square piece of metal, at least a little slightly bigger than your hole, and at least the same width as your old cross member. Drill a few holes in it and bolt it to your transmission mount. Then just set your cross member up there and mark out what needs to be cut so you can get the new plate as close to fitting into the hole as possible. Once you've got it to the point where you can fully bolt in the cross member with that plate bolted to the transmission mount, then you can tack it in place and then pull the whole thing off and fully weld it around. As you can see here, this corner is sticking way up and it's a little hard to bridge that big of a gap. Now as you can see here, our bolt holes are all the way on one side, so all I have to do is cut a groove down the middle like this and then hammer it down so that we can get a closer gap. Now it's just a simple matter of welding it up and giving it a clean coat of paint to prevent it from rusting. Now with the case in and supported by the cross member, we can measure out the drive shaft to see if they still fit. Now luckily the rear drive shaft had enough play in it where it still was able to reach without overstretching it. Now unfortunately that wasn't the case for the front drive shaft. It wasn't safe. If we had any axle droop, it would just pull it out or bend it or break the yoke. Luckily it wasn't too hard to extend and we only needed about 1.5 inches. We also had a small issue with the front output yoke as it didn't match up with the yoke on the drive shaft. Thankfully, the splines matched on the original quadra-track output yoke, so we just swapped them over. Alright, let's get back to the drive shaft. Like I said, we only had to extend it about 1.5 inches, so we just started off by cutting it in half. We made the cut as low as we could on the shaft so that it would be out of the way of any of the exhaust pipe or the cross member. But we couldn't put it too low as we didn't want to interfere with the slip joint shown here. Now I will say that we got very lucky because once we cut it, we were able to find a scrap tube that had a perfect fit around the diameter of the drive shaft. So all we had to do was grind the paint off, slip the tube over, and then we could weld the two halves together, and the tube would keep the drive shaft straight. Now you can drill some holes for plug welds or a longer piece of pipe to beef this up a little bit. Just take your time and weld slowly so you don't overheat the drive shaft and warp it. About an hour later and we had our new drive shaft ready to go. And Jason must have done a great job because I took it on the highway about a week later and I didn't feel any vibrations. Luckily, the stock shift linkage was able to reach all the way up into the opening for the transmission cover. Now, I did have to notch it about 1/2 inch in order for it to clear and reach 4 low, but I didn't have any issues installing that shift linkage other than banging my knuckles trying to put the bolts in. That being said, if you have a twin stick kit, you might have to make some adjustments because there's not a lot of free space in here. And since this Jeep is no longer all-wheel drive, we don't want the drive shafts and the axle shafts from spinning all the time when it's in 2-wheel drive. That'll wear out the bearings in the transfer case. So in my next video, I'll show you how easy it is to install some locking hubs. Today, I'm going to quickly show you how to install some locking hubs onto your 4-wheel drive. First thing, get a screwdriver to take off this hub cap. That looks gross. Let's clean this up a little. First step, take off the little snap ring. Then we should be able to pull this gear straight out. Just needs a little persuasion. Some technical difficulties. Piece of cake. And then we got the gear out. We don't need this spring anymore. Just clean this up a little bit. Now, there is this little ring in here. This is what keeps the axle in place and the bearings in place. So you can see it's pretty loose right now. I can move it around, so let's tighten it up with the screwdriver a little bit. There is a tool that'll fit that ring. It's like a big socket. You can probably find them in AutoZone or something, but I don't want to. Should be good. Alright. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to pack as much grease in here as we can. this grease is going to prevent dust and dirt, grime, rust, and water from getting to the bearings inside. Here's the new gear. You only need a couple screws, but I suggest sticking them all in because otherwise the grease will seep through the holes. Boom. Now we can get this grease pushed in. The way these locking gear hobs work is really simple. They have this inner gear right here that connects to the drive shaft, and they have an outer gear on the other side of the silver ring that connects to the outside of the wheel. And you see right now, if I spin it, the inner gear doesn't spin because it's not connected. When I put the cap on, it has springs right here. And what those are going to do is when you turn the knob, this knob, it'll screw down right here and it'll press on this middle gear. And when it presses down, it locks it into place. See, right there, you can tell it's locked into place with the inner and outer gear now. Now I won't be able to spin it. Well, I will be able to spin it, but if you watch the drive shaft, if I lock this and then spin it, it moves the drive shaft along with it. And it's free. Then the hub is separated from the axle. Alright, now that we have this gear in, next step is we need to lock it in place so it doesn't come flying out with this snap ring. So, get your screwdriver, because you're going to need it. Press one end in and hold it there with your screwdriver. And then work your way around to get the rest in. And then just go around, make sure it's all the way in there. Now we got to put in the inner snap ring. There we go. Next, we can put the cap on. And there you go, simple as that. Now, I won't have to worry about the axle spinning all the time when I'm driving on the road, and I should get better gas mileage, and you know, I think they might help me off-road too. I don't know. Until next time, see you later.